but I learned those rules in the lab. So then what I have to do is work with ecologists and marine biologists and physiologists and geochemists and say, okay, now if we take these same rules and transpose them to another system, what do those rules look like? Right? So it's, in this sense, it's a bit of an art form.
It is.
Right? And it's slow going, but it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And
so things you're learning from your experiments with cells.
Mm-hmm.
So you're asking in your work with marine biologists, for example, how would that work for a multicellular creature?
I stay away from multicellular
creatures.
Okay,
so what do you mean by another system?
So I mean these unicells in the ocean.
In the wild.
Yes. So of course the same rules are going to apply to multicellular organisms.
Yeah.
But then you're adding yet other levels of complication where you have development.
Yes.
Right? And at some point I just run out of hours in the day and I just don't know enough about that to start working with it. And yeah, I think at some point you just draw a line. You're like, I'm not going to work on this.
Yeah.
But
somebody else might.
Somebody else, yes, many people do. And so you just, and it's a trade-off. You can't know everything. So I find my strategy is that I draw sort of, I work with these unicellular things and I don't deal with development of multicellular organisms, not because it's not interesting. It's super interesting, super important, fascinating, all these things. And despite all of this, I still only have 24 hours in my days.
Yeah.
And if I spend that time learning half-assedly about development, I will do less well at the things I'm supposedly a specialist in. So I stick to the bottom of the food web. I stick to these microbes.
Yes.
And I think they're fascinating actually because microbes are not closely related, right? These microbes are really, really distantly related, and most of the life on the planet is microbial. And I always get kind of miffed when people say, well, it's only microbes. I'm like, well, to a first approximation, that's all of life. You know, multicellular things that you can see are exceptional. Most of life is not multicellular. Most of life can't be seen. And there's also the thing that I am a human. I just don't want to study humans. I spend enough time humaning.
So what percentage of the ocean is microbial?
I don't know.
Somebody said it recently, and I think it was something like 60% or 65%.
I have no idea.
No, but a lot.
A lot. Much.
And within us as well, within our bodies and on
we're
our
just
bodies.
a very complex housing system for microbes.
Yeah.
So that's, I find microbes incredibly beautiful and fascinating. So I don't have an objective reason for studying them rather than something else. I can spout a few statistics about how important they are, but ultimately you study what you find interesting, and at least I don't quite know why I find it interesting. I don't quite know why I find microbes really interesting, yet even though I'm a biologist and I know I'm sitting in departments with people who study plants, I still can't identify even very basic plants when I go hiking. It's just, there's like a Teflon area of my brain where that is, and I have zero desire to study it despite the fact that I know it's important and interesting and I can tell you why plants matter and they're delicious.
So you have respect for other fields of study.
Yeah.
But you have to be very focused in order to excel in what you
I think you do, because the amount of knowledge you need is large, but also you need to devote time to just sitting there and thinking, right? So you need to think about things and like throw ideas around and do a lot of extra reading, and then you go into the lab and you futz a little bit and you do some experiments. And there's certainly value to be being very generalized and knowing a little about a lot. There's the opposite strategy of knowing a lot about a little is also valuable. The thing being, in both cases, you need to know where the limits of your knowledge are, right? People who are very generalized, who know a little bit about everything, are great because they help to connect all these big ideas that the rest of us perhaps don't see. And this is really, really important, but it's also important that they realize that means they're not going to be able to perhaps test a lot of that in a very rigorous way, right? Whereas I can do what I do very rigorously, but as soon as I want to sort of step outside of that, I really need to work with other people.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting issue because
Either way,
as a member of the public and an artist, not a scientist, I have to trust what you do. And the papers, the results that you come up with, I have to trust that they're as much as we collectively know about how the world works at this point in time.
Right.
And that's something that we can't directly test because we don't have your skills.
Well, you're not really trusting me. It's like you're trusting the whole community of scientists, which is, I'm never allowed to do an experiment without many other scientists vetting it. I'm never allowed to publish a paper without many other scientists vetting it. So by the time you see work, it's been put through the ringer by multiple people who are often overqualified to look at it. The other thing is I think you have a really good point, where you're saying it's the best we can do right now with what we know, which means that just because a scientist comes up with something and then 10 years later or 15 years later, that's disproven, it doesn't mean it was at the time not the best available explanation.
Yeah.
Right, so science is self-correcting, which means the people doing the most interesting stuff, the people moving science forward, are going to be disproven time and time again because they're the ones putting out the new ideas, and new ideas are usually going to be, I don't want to say wrong, new ideas are often going to be fuzzy at first. The details might be or they might be wrong altogether. But you're not going to move forward without making that first leap. So I think people often misunderstand that science is dynamic and it's self-correcting. But just because we know it's self-correcting, it doesn't mean you shouldn't trust it, or that you shouldn't think that not listening or going. You shouldn't think that just because something is going to be corrected in the future that it has no value now. Because sometimes what you're correcting are tiny details, and ultimately they're not going to change the very basis of what we're doing. So, for instance, I'm from Canada, I'm from North America, where people still debate whether or not evolution happens. And a lot of times people say, well, are scientists still studying this? I'm like, well, we're studying evolution, but this is sort of like, we're dotting I's and crossing T's, people. The fact that evolution occurs, that natural selection works, that all of these processes, the big picture has been well established, and has been well established for 100 years or longer, right? So people often sort of misinterpret the idea of, we're still playing with details or adding details or applying it to this situation that people didn't know about before, right? Versus the entire idea is up for grabs. Like, no, the entire idea is not up for grabs, right? It's sort of like you redesign spacecraft, but you don't doubt the gravity. You don't doubt gravity. You're like, it's not that we've misunderstood. It's not that gravity suddenly stopped existing, but you can still improve your airplanes and spacecrafts and things like that, right? And that's sort of how I think of it. So using, like, right now we're really struggling to get this evolutionary perspective into global models of how oceans work. Not because we don't understand evolution and we don't understand oceans, and both of them still have a lot of work, right? We're still doing a lot of details. It's that these two fields have been separate since they were invented, right? And so getting them together is actually quite the feat. The scientists often, it takes a few years before we can even really understand what the other person is talking about.
Is it a language thing to begin with?
At first it's a language thing. Like I'll say the word acclimation, I mean something quite specific. I mean, like, when I say acclimation, I mean a physical response to an environmental change that doesn't require any genetic change. So non-evolution change. So sweating or shivering. When you get hot, you sweat. When you get cold, you shiver. This is acclimation. You don't change your genetic makeup when you acclimate. And evolution is changing the genetics of a population over time. That requires reproduction. It requires a long time scale because you're changing genetic makeup. And somebody else might say evolution when they mean only evolution that increases fitness. Or they might say acclimation to mean anything that happens under a certain time period. Or they might mean acclimation only when it's a response that's positive, when it helps the organism. So it gets a little bit dicey. And we end up having these long discussions about what is fitness. And I think we also don't understand where the limits of knowledge are in the other field. So there's a lot of we assume the other person knows something that they don't know and that they can't know.
Just to go back a bit, the two fields we're talking about.
Evolution and oceanography.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So evolutionary biology grew up on land.
Evolutionary biology grew up on land.
Yeah, which is ironic because Darwin, of course, was on the ship. But part of this is, and a lot of modern microbial evolution is oriented towards medicine. And this is partly because if you're asking just questions about how evolution works, it's much easier to get money to do things that are relevant to humans than not relevant to humans. And so if you can ask the same question in a medical or non-medical system, you ask it in a medical system, right? That's a no-brainer. And so experimental evolution and microbial evolution has very much shifted towards working on things that are relevant to medicine. So it's gotten further and further away from ecology, and it never was very close to marine biology. And people do evolution of marine systems on more multicellular things, on fish, and they also do a lot of taxonomy. So there is, I don't want to make it sound like these two disciplines are really far apart. There's just this toolbox called experimental evolution that has not really been applied to marine systems very, very much at all.